Good morning. Welcome to Accuracy in America. I'm your host, Don Irvine, and my co-host joining today is Brian McNichol.
Hello, deplorables, dregs, despicables, chumps, Neanderthals, and those dog-faced bounty soldiers.
That's right. All right. Today's weather report. Actually, it's just kind of cold and rainy where we are. I don't know what's over there in your neck of the woods.
Cold and rainy.
Cold and rainy. Cold. I guess it's cold and rainy everywhere in this region. We've had some nice
Yeah,
weather.
the whole East Coast, everybody's kind of in it today.
Yeah. I mean, last night before I went to bed, I always kind of like check the weather on Alexa, and it says, so I think it said rainy and snowy, and I'm like, snowy?
Yeah, there's supposed to be, I don't think it's going to stick, but there is some snow. And farther north of here, it's going to be, like Boston will probably get 4 or 5 inches of snow out of this.
Yikes. Okay. I'm in spring mode. Okay. I mean, first day of spring is what, March 20th, I think, or something like that. So
there was March 9th is actually the anniversary. I think it was 1993. One of the biggest snowstorms that's been around here since I've been here. It was like 23 inches. I remember it was the started on the Friday night of Selection Sunday weekend of this weekend of the basketball.
Here's a good reference point.
Right? Yeah, I was trapped inside watching those tournament games. And this weekend, I mean, like basketball will start at noon and it'll be on till, way after we go to bed, and then, it'll be on like that again tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday and so forth. And then poof, it stops. Right. But yeah, it's, we just sat there and played darts and watched basketball. Me and my brother, we couldn't go anywhere. I mean, it was, we were literally, I was in this house in Sterling and the snow got so high to get the door open. We were literally snowed in and we were prepared. We had bought, we had a bunch of food. We cooked a big roast and, we were ready for it. But, played darts and watched basketball for like 2 solid days.
So I'm going to assume that was before you were married.
Oh, yeah. 1993. I mean, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, no, that's funny. See, I won't remember a lot of those things. I mean, you have a great reference point there with Selection Sunday and everything like that, because that is your gig kind of a thing. That's you. Yeah. That is your world, But now it's like without a Facebook memory, I won't necessarily remember what day it snowed until those memories pop up. A picture says, 7 years to go today, and here's a picture. And I'm like, oh, that was a lot of snow.
Yeah, that was ugly. Glad I don't have to shovel that again.
That's right. Yeah, I keep thinking like I said, I think I've said this before. It's like, I'm for mild winters because I'm at the age now where I really don't want to shovel that driveway.
Yeah, I really look at that as like, where do I get that time back?
Yeah.
I mean, I could be doing like anything else.
That's very true.
Watching paint dry or something.
Yeah, I may have to join. I think YouTube TV's got 2 weeks free, and I may even. I was telling the boys that might want to go ahead and take advantage of that, and then subscribe for a month so I can get through March Madness. Since I cut my cable last summer. I mean, that's. I will say one thing about all of this, cord cutting and things like this is that because there are so many other options. You can get a week or 2 free of something, and then you can subscribe. And I think YouTube TV's regular rate is like $65 now or whatever. But that's for what you do it for a month and then you cancel and you come back whenever you want to or whatever. But you're not locked into like these long-term cable contracts for someone like me who's not necessarily watching a lot of TV overall anyway, or something like that. Since my life seems to be focused around, thanks to my wife, to K-dramas, and I can't seem to tear myself away from Netflix. And, it's horrible. There's this one thing after as soon as one ends, another one begins, and I'm like, what am I doing to my life? And I don't even understand Korean. I mean, if it wasn't for the subtitles, I'd be totally lost, right? All right. Anyway, on to more serious matters and things like that. So here we are. This is like day 13 of the war. This whole invasion of Russia into Ukraine. Fascinating in the way that it's, it's at least 10 days longer, in my opinion, that Putin wanted or expected. And the longer this goes on, I mean, the numbers still say, Putin will win because he's got the numbers but boy, the Ukrainians and the support they've received is vast and has really stymied Putin and his army, and they I don't know, they're not prepared. I mean, I think we've talked about this a little bit before.
Right.
But boy, go ahead.
I mean, you were right. I mean, they started running out of fuel on about day 4, which shows that they expected to be there 3 days, right? I mean, they're utterly unprepared for the level of resistance they got. They made these people mad. I mean, I'm not sure how this ends, but they're going to be fighting rear guard insurgency action against the Russians for decades, right? You're going to be decades. Every Russian's going to be having to sit in the corner of the room to make sure nobody comes up behind them, right? Because I mean, these people are angry about this, and they should be. They weren't bothering anybody, and they were attacked by a sovereign country. There's some people in the United States that are saying, it's kind of a shame. It's like we have lost so much faith in the media and in the government to tell us the truth, that now when the story appears to be pretty cut and dried, this is something conservatives, we've made our bones opposing communist takeovers of their, unprovoked takeovers of their unwilling neighbors, right? And now you have half the conservative movement is out there saying, hey, I'm not so sure that Putin's in the wrong here. It's like, come on, guys, this is, that didn't change about us. We still see communism for what it is, and that Putin is its exemplar right now, and that this is something that could have happened 10 or 20 or 40 or 50 years ago, right? The Russians, in fact, it has happened, right? The Russians have attacked Ukraine before during our lifetimes, right? This is like the 3rd time since just you and me have been here. So, the idea that this should be some kind of shocker or whatever, it's not there.
Yeah, yeah. I don't quite understand this. So as you may recall, so I have a friend of mine who does a kind of a podcast, and we talk politics on Friday nights and things like that, and it can be an interesting show, to say the least, with the crew he assembles, because it tends to change a little bit. There's some people are away, some other people join in, and then they do get some comments from people who are watching. But we were talking about Ukraine on Friday night, and we were talking about Putin and things, and my friend who started this whole thing. I mean, he's accused Putin of war crimes and all these kinds of things. And then we had a mutual friend of ours pipe up there, and he starts talking about, there were 3 of us. I can't remember how many people. There were at least 3 of us, I guess, on the show that night. And he accuses us of parroting, the media line and all this kind of stuff. And, and all these, and I'm sitting here going like, what in the heck is this guy talking about?
Yeah.
I'd say I couldn't quite figure it out, what the heck his angle was on all of this at all. But yeah, you're right about this, is that you get a bunch of conservatives who are on this other side now, and you're like, I don't understand how you can't understand. There is to me a very distinct good versus evil.
Right. I mean, this hasn't changed. You recognize this as evil because it's evil, right? And we've seen it before. So yeah, I don't know. We're sort of getting in it, but it's like, why is this? Why is this happening? It's a culture of distrust. It's like, we don't trust the government, trust the media. So the fact that the government and the media are lining up telling us something, and that Joe Biden is saying basically, about this, he's as revulsed by this as we are. Sometimes Joe Biden is revulsed about the right stuff, right? It's they're not. None of them are wrong all the time, and we can debate which of the measures he's taken have been effective or ineffective or whatever. But he's against Russia attacking Ukraine, and I'm also against Russia attacking Ukraine. So in that sense, I'm on his side about this, right? So and I hear this like drumbeat of people. We should abandon this. All right, when are you going to fight? Because what has happened since this started? Finland, Switzerland, The other Baltic states are, they're saying, hey, we're aligned with the West and Ukraine against this. Poland's threatened to send weapons, right? MiGs and some other stuff, right? So like all of the neighboring countries are lining up on the side of Ukraine. So if, Putin succeeds in Ukraine, what is he going to do? What's next? It's those guys. So if you don't fight them now, when are we going to fight them? What will be legit? What will be worth our trouble? Right? Because if Ukraine's not worth your trouble, okay, is Poland worth our trouble? They're a member of NATO. Don't we kind of have to do it then? Because and Putin's complaint doesn't change, right? Putin says, these people are too close to my border. These, enemies who want to join with the West and work against me are too close to my border. We've got Cuba 90 miles off our border, being extremely hostile to us since, the late 50s, right? You got to deal with that. And if you take Ukraine, then, the next countries in are now on his border, one of which is Poland, right? So, now, yes, you're right. Now you're on the border of a NATO member. Right now you have Ukraine between Russia and a NATO member. If he takes Ukraine, there's nothing between him and a NATO member. So where does this stop? When do we decide we got to get involved? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I think Bob's always got. He's got a lot of good comments for us all the time.
Yeah, it's right. What are we talking about? It's like, get coherent on this. Right. There's a lot to criticize there. We get everybody's fuel access turned off except for Russia. You can only access fuel from Russia, and then we say, hey, we're turning off Russia, right? So now you're basically forcing the oil market to go way over $200, maybe even $300 a barrel, right? Because of like the ineptitude of the timing of all this, right? And the thing that we need, and is you got to ramp up domestic production. You got to make it a worthwhile investment to produce here at home. And I'm not sure he's willing to do that. He said, you remember one of the Democrat debates, Biden said domestic oil production will end in the U.S. on day one of my presidency. He didn't quite do that, but he's working toward it.
Right. All right. Yeah. You were mentioning. You've talked here about the media and the government and the lack of trust. We carry cell phones. There's lots of cell phones all around the world. I think that as a result of the rapid spread of communication, the availability of these electronic devices, that once again, the media's role in this can be diminished. As long as the communications stay up. Elon Musk is providing some Starlink satellites, I think, in order to try to keep things, going there, as the Russians have been trying to, kind of knock out some of the communication facilities and things like this.
Yeah, along those lines, I don't know about you, but I've never seen protests inside of Russia to Russian aggression like the ones that we saw images of, at the outset of this, right?
Yeah,
but turned off. They closed that loophole. But for a few days there, that was astonishing. Do you ever remember seeing that?
No, it kind of reminds me of the protests in Cuba, right?
Yeah.
We had some of those.
Really?
Yeah, he's like, there are people who disagree with what the government is doing, and as soon as that happens, you try to shut them down. You can see that. Even Hong Kong has been an example of those massive protests in Hong Kong have been basically eliminated by the government, right?
Right.
They have really shut that down, and you can see what happens to freedoms there. But because of this, because of the spread of electronic news like that, you don't necessarily have to have the same filter of the media in terms of what's going on there. If these people can use these devices and find ways of showing you some real footage and things like that, it was a pretty horrific footage, that whole thing about where that Russian, I guess it was, I don't know if it was an RPG or something like that, had killed that family, and you just saw these bodies in the street. They're just civilians trying to flee. right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is this, rather than just going after whatever military target there, I mean, when Putin starts to ramp this up and he starts to go after civilian targets, this begins to make me wonder what's going on here. Plus the fact, exactly what is in Putin's mind when he goes and they start shelling around Chernobyl, and
Right.
they start going,
And it's and Chernobyl, so the power has been cut. And so they're running it on generators now, but they only have enough generator fuel for 48 hours. So when the 48 hours runs out, I'm not quite sure where we are on that 48 hours. You run the risk of that, the controls, the things that keep those, the plant itself has been decommissioned, but the rods are still there, still stored there, and they're in cooling pins, right? And because that's the way that's usually done. And if they can't keep that water cool, then you have a chance of some pretty bad stuff happening. But fog of war, right?
Right. Well, I mean, so I mean, say Putin succeeds and he takes over, he manages to get control of Ukraine. Even though he'll have, as you said, I think there will be a long-term effect of you'll have resistance for a long time to come if that actually comes to pass. But if they run out of power, at Chernobyl, what's he inheriting? Is he going to how long?
Right.
Exactly when does he gain control versus how long will the plant be out, and exactly what is the effect? I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is a disaster just waiting to happen. The strategy, the everything that he's done to date has just been, badly miscalculated on all ends and everything like this.
Yeah, so that's another question. Look at here.
Yeah, he's got a couple more here. I have to try to catch up.
Right, that's right. So,
this is
Charlton.
Charlton.
So yeah, he's right. So what he brings up a point about this is the problem is Psaki says they have 9,000 leases out there that nobody's producing on, and this and the other. The current climate, the oil producers say we are producing as much oil as we can within the current regulatory framework, and no one wants to invest anymore in U.S. oil production unless they can see some demonstrated proof, like Charlton was talking about that it's going to be stable and it's going to stay this way. It's like, so we're saying, hey, okay, the Keystone pipeline, which I wish he would do. But, if they okayed it, I mean, would banks and, financing would rush back into this project? Because, it's like they're jerked this chain a few times now. I mean, how many times will people sink money into this, not knowing if it'll remain viable the next time there's an election?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's just a lot going on there. I mean, the sanctions, have definitely had an effect on the oil market for Russia because they're having a hard time finding anybody to buy it. I mean, China's tried to come to the rescue, but the bidders are scarce for Russian oil at this point in time. Biden has he's basically blocked. He says banned Russian imports of Russian gas and oil. Well, and apparently I think Americans in general, if by looking at some of what polls I've seen, they're willing to pay a higher price for gasoline if that's
for
what
a little while. But I mean, here's the thing about it. It's like, don't make this like we're pitching into the good of Ukraine here, because the price of gas was skyrocketing before this was announced, right? The price of gas, we were already over $400 a gallon. The worst week in the history of gas prices last week went up 49.7 cents a gallon across the country. We've never had a week where it went up 49 cents in a week, right? So, that was before he came to this brilliant conclusion. So don't act like, this is what caused that, right? So what they're telling you is they know their policies are responsible and they're about to make it worse, and they don't care and they don't intend to do anything to relieve it. Okay, now that may change because a lot of things change when they start looking at the polling. And the polling, they changed. The science of COVID turned on a dime when the polling started revealing that it wasn't sustainable, right? So when, $6, $7, $8 gas, all of which is well within the realm of possibility at this point, starts to materialize, that we'll see where the polling is on helping out the Ukrainians by, not turning on our own gas production. And Republicans are actually on the right side politically here. They're hammering them. Why can't we increase our own production? And their arguments are unpersuasive.
Yeah, I mean, before Biden made his policy announcement, and policy does in this case, definitely trails what already had happened. Prices had been spiking. Oil prices had already topped $100 a barrel, but then it took another huge jump on the rumor, basically the thought that this would happen, that that we would basically ban this import and the other nations would be basically do the same. And so then the markets react to those news, that kind of news. And it did send. I mean, both you and I and anybody watching has seen this price spike. You talk about it. I drive by, a couple of gas stations every day to go to the gym and do some other things, and the rapid increase that I saw was just mind blowing. And even this morning, though the price of regular in my area, which tends to be high anyway, has at least stabilized for the last few days. When I drove by the nearby Shell station here on the way to the gym this morning, it was up 26 cents since last night. And I'm like, whoa, if you're driving a diesel power, fuel vehicle, you're really, really hurting, because the prices of diesel have just increased ridiculously, over this time. I mean, we're getting hit on regular, but the diesel drivers are just crazy. I'm talking to my son Spencer last night as we were running over to Costco, and he was talking with his, he'd been, I guess, messaging, texting with his brother who's living out in Utah, and his brother went to go get gas at the local Costco. He says there were over 80 cars in line because the price of gas was about 50 cents cheaper. Now, I believe that my son, that particular son, is using the premium gas, and that's usually where the biggest discrepancy is. I mean, you can save money by going to a Costco or a Sam's Club for sure over most of the major oil stations, but if you're buying premium, the difference between the premium tends to be even greater than it is for the say the 87 blend, octane. Right. So yeah, I began to think about that last night. I thought, so if that process continues on, it's like, how much gas does that Costco station have? If people are now flooding the station, there's a point where they probably will run low on fuel and have to wait until they can get refueled. We're seeing kind of almost a run on gas right now because prices have spiked so fast that you're going. I mean, I'm topping off. I haven't topped off a tank in a long time. In the last 10 days, I am doing it. If I'm close to the gas station, I'm thinking like I'm running over there and trying to beat what I think will be a price increase, just so I don't have to pay another 15 cents a gallon, even if it's only 5 or 6 gallons.
So I am between basketball seasons, right? The winter season has ended. Spring season starts next week. So this is like one of the few, like 2 or 3 weeks of the year when I'm not driving around all the time, right? So I haven't filled up my car in like 2 weeks, and I think it's going to be like, the next gas will cost $2 more per gallon than the last gas, just because I haven't happened to, it's sort of like I'm almost in a hurry to run out before it gets even higher,
Yeah.
So, but it's a very strange thing, and it's going to get worse. And you think about, we're just at the start of the summer travel season. That's not, what does that do to that? No, you can't. You're going to go on a cross country car trip when it's $8 a gallon. You're going to change all the nature of all that stuff. All the beach trips and all that kind of stuff really gets hurt when the cost of gas climbs up like this, right? Because you're talking, going to Ocean City is $100 of gas,
Yeah, no, it starts to make an effect. People are, there are stories now where people are trying to rethink about, their driving patterns. It is, for me, it also says, now I'm like, I have tried over the years anyway to try to consolidate trips when I can, but I think my wife and I are going to take double down on that and say, okay, what trips can we just, pull together so we're not making, this errand and this errand, combine as many of those as possible so we make fewer trips and waste, and just use less gas. Now
Yeah.
I want to get you so the station I normally go to is a Marathon oil station because it's probably about 2 miles away from my house, I guess, or well, maybe 3 miles away from my house. So, but it has been trending as basically lower price, and it's what we call top tier gas. It's got a top tier gas rating, which a bunch of stations do, but I mean, like if you're an independent like Liberty or Free State or whatever, most of those people they're not serving that blend of gasoline that's supposed to be cleaner and better, or whatever. And so we only use that gas in the car, and it's highly recommended by the manufacturer, et cetera, et cetera. So I go over there, the attendant.
Don't say anything bad about Liberty Gas, man.
Even
if it's true, I don't want to know it.
It's not top tier, okay? That's all I know. Okay, it's not as good as top tier, okay? So I'm banned from going to those places, which makes it interesting when I'm on a road trip because we basically have to say Costco or like Marathon or Shell. We can't go to the off-brand places unless it shows up on that list. But during the last few weeks. One day I decided to actually ask the attendant inside. I could go inside and have my credit card, and I asked him where he was from because I knew he wasn't born here. I was pretty sure he was born here, and so he's from Nepal, and seems to be a nice enough guy and everything like that. And now he wants to get a little more conversational with me now that he's seen me so many times. Matter of fact, I went there twice in one day. Once to top off, both cars, and he thought as a result of that I was a Lyft driver or a Uber driver. Mm-hmm. But last Saturday when gas was $3.82, right? He says, "Oh, this is going to be temporary. This will last a week, and things like this, right?" So, and I show up a few days later and now it's $4.07. So that wasn't very temporary.
Yeah,
so now
it was temporary $3.82.
Now yeah, right, exactly. Temporary at $3.82. So then when I gassed up at $4.07, he's saying that he says you can see that price of oil is like $130 a barrel. There's 40 barrels of gas, in that barrel of oil, but that's unrefined. Then you got to go through the refining process and things like that. So just on the face of it, you're talking already over $3 a gallon before it even gets refined at that price level.
Yeah.
But he was then saying, I was trying to figure out what exactly he was trying to get to, but he was basically saying the U.S. has gas that they won't use. And so I'm thinking that he was trying to talk about drilling, that, in essence, that we have the capability of getting more gas here rather than relying on foreign powers. And I'm going to assume that being from Nepal, he's not necessarily a big fan of Russia or anything like that anyway. I don't think he's keen on all this, that he's seeing how this is going on. But I mean, even I don't know, even he as the gas, he still has to drive there for his job and back home every day. Everybody's getting all those people who were who claimed for $15 an hour. Now we're at $20 an hour for a lot of jobs because of inflation and all these other things. Even that, they're getting hurt, right? I mean,
regressive tax is the most regressive tax is higher energy prices.
Right.
You cannot avoid it. You pay it through everything you buy, right? And there's no way to shield the poor from the impact.
And so what is Pete Buttigieg's answer? Electric vehicles. He'll solve everything. Right.
And here's the funny part about that. So he said it will help two groups, low income people.
Well, if you give them a
car, right? You get the average sports car in America is $44,000. The average electric car is $55,000. So the poor can't even think about owning an electric car, right? And the other group he said would help was rural people, like who have long drives. Well, these things are good for short drives, but it's long drives, and you have to get them charged, and you start running into a logistical problem, right? It's okay for a rep bouncing around town, right? You just charge it up at home, take off, hook it back up when you get home. It's the people in the country who can't use this, right? You can't get in it and go 80 miles into town and then 80 miles back. That's too much, right? So, I mean, it's like, and the batteries are 900 pounds and not recyclable. So, and cost what, 11,000 bucks or something. So there's nothing, this is not something for the poor people, and it's not something for the country people, but it shows you how disconnected they are, how like just completely aloof from what real Americans are going through throughout all this. I think they're going to get, an education on it in November. You can see that, our friend Mark Elias is going around. He's had a pretty good bit of success getting fighting over these congressional maps, right, in the different states, and it's worth about four seats in New York, one in North Carolina, one in Minnesota, and one they split somebody Kansas or somewhere. So I mean, it's about 7 or 8 seats. When you start talking about, there's a 5-seat difference now, and 35 of them have quit. You can generally, it's a pretty good rule of thumb that the number of people who quit will equal the number of seats that will flip. Right? When you lose 40 people, about 40 seats are going to flip. It's not that those are the seats that flip, but that just shows you that that's the level of vulnerability, right? So, it's not perfect, but it's sort of a general guide. So, you start taking 10, 8, 9, 10 of those seats away, and then it may not flip, right? It's a lot. The Democrats have a lot better chance. So, it's some consequential stuff going on just below the surface while we're all watching Ukraine and the gas price.
Yeah, I mean, and this disconnect. I mean, this is the problem for this administration, is that their cabinet people, they are very disconnected from a lot of things. And Buttigieg is maybe one of the biggest examples, because he's disappeared at times. We don't know where the heck he's been and stuff like that. When he should be the face of something. But this idea that the poor and the rural, I mean, talk about something that makes absolutely no sense. I mean, Ford, I think, makes a small EV truck called the Maverick, and it's about $20,000. But I don't think even Ford is all that interested in producing that truck, because I think that it's a lower margin business for them at that rate. They want the higher margin on the EVs when they can get them. But I still haven't seen anyone really explain to me exactly, when you get this lower sector, this lower part of the population, the lower income people, if you manage to subsidize them, basically by saying, you buy the car, we'll give you a federal tax credit equal to the value of the car, which is going to cost you and me and everybody else a lot. We're going to be the ones paying for it in the end. That's how, and we know full well that's how the green energy thing has really survived and thrived to an extent, is because the government has thrown out so many subsidies for electric cars, for solar panels, for wind farms, all of those things. They've gotten a toehold because of the credits that the government, the federal tax credits that have been laid out there, right? Elon Musk has built a business on the back of federal tax credits, but it's there, it's in the law. Go ahead, take advantage of it. That's fine.
So this guy, he's not born in the United States, right? From South Africa. In 2015, Los Angeles Times estimated that he had gotten $5.3 billion in government grants for his various businesses. And that was 2015. And, I followed this issue for various reasons. And I've not been able to find a reliable estimate of it since. So in other words, in 2015, they stopped counting how much money they were giving Elon Musk, the world's richest man, right? And it's well, you can imagine it's at least doubled when you consider, he's involved in space, solar, and electric cars, right? That's 3 things that they subsidize, crazily, right? I think one of the things is like the subsidies for green energy the Greens come back and say, what about the subsidies for oil? Like, okay, that I would pay a little bit higher gas prices for. Eliminate all energy subsidies, oil, gas, green, nuclear, let them stand on their own. I think oil, you would get market efficiencies. Those are smart people. They wouldn't be in that business, and they would clean it up. And I think that, until you would see a push in solar to make, and wind, especially to make the technology scalable, right? Basically, it's like how towns have those little trains that they basically serve your boutiques to the town next over boutique, and they're for having cute little teas and train station and so forth, right? They're not really transportation modes, right? So it's that kind of thing. They're boutique. They're for decoration.
Yeah, well, on Musk, I think one of the things I give him a lot of credit for. Yeah, he's got all that. He's got all this money with all these tax credits, all these federal subsidies. Is that he seems to have laid out a plan to formulate a business based on that, right? And then knowing that the subsidies, these tax credits, like on vehicles, everybody gets a tax credit up to this amount of vehicles sold, and then it gets reduced, and then finally eliminated, kind of thing. And he seems to have basically become the serial entrepreneur of that, looking at the tax code, looking at where the subsidies are, and then as one business starts to kind of line down, there's another one waiting, and then and then there's another one waiting, and then there's another, and so he builds a series of these so that the flow of money on this federal money continues. He just goes from one business to the other to the other. And look, and as solar was kind of winding down in terms of the subsidies, he basically just rolled that into Tesla. Became one company. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we will expect from him. And a lot of companies have benefited. Look, my younger son works for a solar panel installation company, and they're doing pretty well, apparently. But that's, those are things that are based on having those federal tax, all those subsidies that builds the business that gets people to say, yeah, sure, I'll do that because the cost to me is negligible, and the savings could actually wind up being something substantial over time. So you got that. You were mentioning earlier too. Well, the other thing too is, and I'm going to harp on this till the end of time, with the EVs and everything, which is, all the charging stations, and, how the people that, even if you give people, an EV, where are they going to charge it? Is there, are you all of a sudden going to then, force or build, a dozen or more charging stations at every apartment
complex wants to spend $5 billion or something to build a national network of charging stations.
Yeah. And and the government's going to have to pay for it, because there's no way the owner of an apartment complex is going to devote space and say, I'm going to spend the money and put in these charging stations, for which they will then charge, the tenants, to do that. Then the tenants are like, I can't afford to do that on top of everything else. It's just kind of this whole thing that just builds up, with that. But you were mentioning earlier too about this whole thing, the statement by the administration, by Psaki, by Biden about, oh yeah, look, we've got 9,000 leases or whatever available, all these kind of things. Once again, big oil's not doing enough to solve this problem. But as you pointed out, what did Biden do on day one? He killed a lot of things, right? He doesn't want leases.
Right. He promised he was going to do it. He said he was going on the campaign trail. Where it's not a surprise. It's not a mistake. It's by design.
Right. And I think it was the Wall Street Journal is pointing out that what Biden doesn't understand, or at least he won't admit to, is that you can go ahead and say this, but it is kind of a lot of doublespeak, because the process of actually getting the lease and then getting to the point where you can actually drill is a very long, drawn out process. It's months. And then you need to be able to be assured you're going to be able to do this. Then a lot of them actually go and try to get loans to actually do the drilling and get the rigs and do all this stuff. It's a very complex financial transaction that has this place. And
what you've done though, the bottleneck of what you're talking about is the financing, right? Because the banks are like, today Biden, he thinks he needs this politically, so he's betraying AOC and the, Green New Deal left, and letting you drill for oil. But, once they get mad at him in 6 or 8 months and, this Ukraine thing is solved one way or the other, will we still be able to do this? Or are you going to say, hey, we're going back to our, green only pursuit and all this kind of stuff, right? Because you've destroyed the climate. You can't be trusted anymore. This is, it's all a matter of trust, right? You sent the signal that you're hostile to fossil fuel. So yeah, each individual, gesture, and they talk about, well, they approved Keystone. It was 8% done, and that oil's already getting in the United States and all this stuff that they say. But you sent the signal that, we're not interested in being in this business anymore, right? Investors beware, because the government is hostile to fossil fuel harvesting in this country right now, right? And by whatever means. And so, storing the Keystone would help some, but I mean, you got to change your whole flavor here, your whole approach, and, assure people that this is the way it be for the duration of your term, right? And there's no way that right now, or really in the foreseeable future, there's the political will in the Biden administration to do this. The dynamics are not in place for this to get any better for a long time.
Right. I mean, and plus, I mean, the administration, I mean, their attitude has been very anti-fossil fuel, as you said, including, where they're getting the SEC to go to publicly held companies, right? And they're saying, we want you to now report, we want to propose a rule where we want you to report your greenhouse gas emissions as a company. And it's not just the oil companies. I mean, they want Coca-Cola, they want McDonald's, they want Starbucks to basically try to figure out what their greenhouse gas emissions are and make it as part of the shareholder document. I mean, this is all this green squeeze, it's just to force these companies to do things that in a lot of cases are just unnatural. I mean, I don't see how these companies can get to zero, really. I mean, there's things that, there are things that they rely on.
Okay. And if they do, okay, so, they always hit, GE did not pay any taxes in such and such a year, right? Okay. How did GE do that? They greened all their buildings. They got tax breaks for greening buildings that exceeded their tax liability. So they didn't owe any taxes because, they greened all their buildings. Okay, so who was for giving people tax breaks to green buildings, right? That was not Republicans, right? That was Democrats, right? So, it's their policies that are making these things happen. You want to be mad, you want to straighten it out with GE, quit giving people money to green buildings.
Right. So, I mean, just out of curiosity, I mean, what do you think that, I mean, Manchin and Tester, which are calling for more, drilling here in the U.S., do you think that's going to have any discernible effect at this point? Or are we going to need to have, can they maybe convince some other fellow Democrats that this is, will they be able to put any pressure on the administration at any point in time about this? I mean,
that's the only hope that this changes, is that as the midterms draw near, and it looks more and more obvious that they're going to be clowned over their energy policy in large part, then yeah, I can see Biden change a course on this, right? Because you're not going to make $7-8 gas popular. It's not going to happen, and people are going to resent it. And we're going to give Ukraine a couple of weeks to a month to straighten out its problems. That we're not going to be willing to put our gas cards where our mouth is on Ukraine anymore. So, the time to start working this out is now, but it's going to take, Biden dragging a lot of his own party along to what they would now consider some pretty unacceptable solutions.
Does the administration even understand what an effect that, gas prices in particular have on the economy and how this results? I mean, if I look at myself, okay, so, I mean, we do, as you know, we do a lot of volunteer church work. And so every several weeks, we have certain assignments, certain things that we do that require us to drive, 50 miles one way to, for a part of a day, and then 50 miles back. Okay. And our cars are getting, even on the freeway, I mean, probably based on all the traffic and everything like that, maybe I'm getting 22 miles a gallon, using our cars or whatever. So I'm going to use 4 or 5 gallons of gas, which is not reimbursable to me whatsoever. At $2, it's okay. At $4, it's starting to hurt because I'm not making any more money than I was a few years ago. So that the money I spend on gas is money I'm not spending somewhere else. The more money I'm spending, the more money I'm spending on groceries, because the inflation in groceries also is money I'm not spending, saying, going out to eat and buying other goods and services and stuff like that. And that, it's going to have, this negative effect on the economy. We're doing, there's still a heavy demand side to a lot of things in there in the economy. But, this is going to eat big time into there, where I think demand for a lot of products and services, they're going to fall, because people have got to spend more money on gas and food, and they will have nothing left over, very little or nothing left over for anything else.
Right. And those, and those higher energy prices are get baked into all the other stuff you're trying to buy. Right. That's big part of why the food's going up so much.
Right. Transportation costs. Yeah. Right.
Everything gets transported. Right.
Right.
So
got another
he has a mess on his hand. That's right. He's right. They're in bed with the global warming stuff, and so is Europe, and they right now it appears they're ready to die on that hill. So we'll see when the suffering gets real. We'll see how committed they are to that. I think it's mindless, but
Yeah, I mean, what about? I mean, we just saw McDonald's, and I think it was Starbucks, maybe some others have ceased their operations in Russia. One of the things I find that's interesting about all of this is that companies have either suspended, some have completely pulled out of Russia at a huge cost to them for their investments that they've had in there. Russia is a potentially huge market, though, and for some companies it's larger than others. But it's not necessarily the most important country in the world for a lot of these things. I mean, is this kind of a thing of where you look at globalization and say, hey, maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all?
Well, good for those companies, having some principles, right? To the extent it's punishment. McDonald's, I understand, is still paying their employees in Russia. They're just not going to run their stores while all this is going on, depriving folks of the Big Mac. I think that's pretty harsh.
I just started eating Big Macs again when they went on sale.
So, I mean, when my first job I ever had, I worked for the YMCA in Shreveport, and we circular that we put out that had all the programs for the summer, right? And it had a coupon in there, 2 for 1 Big Macs. So we would, every night we would get, we had a bunch of those circulars left over, and we would tear out that coupon, and we would go in halves on the cost of a Big Mac, and they would let us have 1 free Coke per day out of the Coke machine. So supper was a Big Mac and a Coke out of the YMCA Coke machine.
I having grown up on on McDonald's and Big Mac, I ate a lot of Big Macs as a kid. I mean, that was something that my parents took me to a lot. And there were, McDonald's was the dominant fast food chain, right? Years, decades ago, and I got away from that as I got older. But now McDonald's has got an app. And so one of the things in the app, the deals for months has been, you can buy 1 Big Mac and get 1 free, 1 per day, like that. Yeah. So sometimes we do that if my wife doesn't feel like cooking. The other really good deal is that when the Wizards win, which isn't too often, but when the Wizards win, Big Macs are $2 for that next day on the app. So, So I have eaten more Big Macs in the last 6 months than I had in the last 10 years.
Yeah, you keep going to that.
The Big Mac to me is not as big as it used to be. I don't think the Big Mac is as big as it used to be. Anyway, we're running low on time, so the last word here.
Last word. So the governor of Utah is going to veto the transgender sports ban, so not let biological boys play against girls. The legislature was talking about creating a to do this case by case. And that, I thought that was kind of an interesting approach, because some of the people who do this are not really a threat to the competitive balance, right? But obviously, like the swimmer in Princeton, I mean, how would you feel if you were one of those? You were a woman who spent your whole life prepared to swim competitively, and you're in the Ivy League. I mean, which is about as good as you can do as a swimmer, because you're getting a fantastic education out of your sport, basically, and then you're getting just be clowned by somebody who's a boy, right? A guy, and I mean, I don't know what you do, but they were going to look at that, look at it case by case. And then the legislature, they decided that board could get politicized and deal answers on a political basis instead of a scientific or whatever basis, and pass an amendment to make it just a straight transgender ban, like I think 17 other states have passed at this point. And the governor, he said, I agreed to the one thing, I didn't agree to the other. And he's standing up for the transgender athletes. This is a tough issue. I've been in youth sports my whole life, and we don't exclude people, right? We find a way to get everybody who really wants to play an opportunity to play. And so when you say, okay, here's somebody that, like, where do they play, right? It's not fair to girls. I coached. I coached girls, and we've had to play against boys, and it's not fair. And people tell you otherwise. They've never been through it. They've never actually gone out and competed. It's like we're playing basketball, and it's like little things. It's like they get every rebound, right? I mean, you're fighting for them with a rebound, your hands and their hands, and you're pulling, and they pull harder. They beat you, right? There's nothing you can do about it. Their core is stronger, their legs are stronger, their feet are stronger, their hands are stronger. You have to do everything perfectly to have a chance. And and it's not fair. It's not, there's no, the people who say that it is fair to those girls, they just need to practice harder or whatever, that's nonsense. Those are people who don't know what they talk about. So, I don't know. I thought I'm willing to explore ideas like this commission, because it did like it was going to work out a way to help at least some of the people, but I can't be for letting biological guys play against girls. It's not fair.
Yeah, I just kind of wonder. I mean, where does all of this end? I understand the difficulty in this, but I mean, we've talked. It's largely been in the swimming field is where it first really popped up and cropped up. But that at this rate, I mean, if you're going to accept that, then does that mean a guy who's a halfway decent basketball player then goes and tries to play on the women's basketball team at college? Or what about how would the WNBA? Would they accept transgender males in the WNBA?
Right. And like it's also in sports like wrestling, where strength is, I mean, there's technique is a big part of it, but if you're stronger than someone, you can rub out a lot of technique problems, right? Track, sprint events, power events, discus and shot put. I mean, you can't say there's not an advantage to being a boy in those events.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I grew up, when I was young, I mean, there were really no female athletes. I mean, there was no Title IX when I was younger and things like that. And my daughter played she played tennis when she was in high school, and I didn't even think about it at the time about how that didn't even exist when I was in high school. Right. A lot of those things didn't exist. And it's fine. I mean, I don't have a problem with the girls should be able to have that chance. I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. But to take a physical male and put them up against female, we know the biological differences. We know the strengths there, and those very physical sports. I mean, not only is there I mean, people can get hurt. I mean, if you're on basketball and some of those more contact sports or something like that,
well, their arm,
somebody could get hurt. I mean, as a result of that, that would be the ultimate tragedy. All right, very good. Just quick thought. Any thought on Brittany Griner?
So Brittany Griner, I guess she had a vape and some marijuana. Hashish, whatever, smoking the vape.
Yeah.
Her timing was not good. We don't really have a lot of good, strong voices inside that government to
Yeah.
advocate for her. They don't really like gay people in Russia, you know. So I mean, her time is not good. Prayers are with them. I don't want anything to happen to her. And that's also one of those things. That's a potential like fire starter kind of issue. So I hope that it could get resolved without anybody else getting hurt.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know she's a terrific athlete. I mean, she's
Yeah.
been a great basketball player, but I do wonder about her judgment in having that particular thing, as to causing the problem. I mean, because we've seen in the past too, we've seen just regular citizens, get tripped up in Singapore and things like that.
Yeah.
You have to know what the rules are and the laws are.
Don't mess around in these foreign countries. I mean, we
No.
have these rights here, and we tend to deal with small crimes in a small way, but the rest of the world does not necessarily follow along with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think she does return to the United States. It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
And one thing else. All right, thanks for joining us, everyone, today. Always, as usual, please stay safe and stay well. Remember, we live in the greatest country in the world. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And God bless America, and we will see you again next week.